Well, last night we got some details from Mueller's prosecutors about General Michael Flynn's cooperation with the investigation. Mueller recommended no jail time for Flynn. Most of the report is still redacted, so we really don't know what most of this is about, but some people on television are very confident that Mike Flynn committed treason.
What the Russians did to us was an intelligence operation. It was an intelligence attack on the core of our democracy. And that's why what Flynn did in supporting a candidate who the Russians were helping through this operation, so egregious.
As a former officer, I'd send him to jail for life. He betrayed his country. But you wind up being torn about it. You know, on a personal level, his life's already ruined. He may be pardonable, but it's unforgivable.
It's almost like the dumber you are, the more time you spend on television. There's got to be a formula. Joe diGenova is not dumb. He's a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and he joins us tonight to assess what's actually happening here. Is there any evidence in the filing last night that General Flynn committed treason?
No, actually, those two people you just saw are idiots, and they don't know what they're talking about. General Flynn actually did nothing wrong. The agent said he didn't lie, but Mueller decided he was going to charge him with lying anyway. Everything that General Flynn did was legal. The transition team communicating with the Russians and other foreign diplomats, perfectly legal. This was a designed plot to frame General Flynn so that they could figure out a way to go after President Trump. It's all part of the same theme. This is anybody with a brain can figure out that Sally Yates had already decided that they were going to frame General Flynn. And you know what? They succeeded. They did. They framed him.
So the report we got last night from Mueller's team suggests that Flynn was cooperating in various other ancillary investigations. What might those be?
You know, I saw that little, it was a very short pleading. It was only like 6 or 7 pages, and it had a page that was all dark with all these ominous things, which allegedly went to the content and the context of the communications that the transition team had. Well, there's no evidence that anything else that he has cooperated on has anything to do with Russian collusion, the basic premise for this idiotic investigation that Mueller helped set up. And so the answer is, I have no idea what he's cooperating on, and it can't be anything of significance. Otherwise, they would have mentioned it somewhere in their pleadings.
So just to take 2 steps back, I think you know General Flynn. I know General Flynn.
Yes, I do.
And here you have a guy who ran a federal intelligence agency, who was a general in the armed services, who committed perjury, says Robert Mueller, and whose life has been completely destroyed. Is that an overstatement? It's
not an overstatement, and in fact, that was their goal. Their goal was to make it impossible for him not to have his life destroyed so that they could have a skin, so that they could show that somebody did something wrong who was communicating with a Russian, even though those communications with the Russian ambassador and other Russians and other foreign officials were perfectly legal. Sally Yates made up this Logan Act nonsense, which he was not charged with. Nobody's been charged in 100 years with violating the Logan Act. Perhaps they should look at John Kerry. The bottom line is this was a frame-up of General Flynn to get Donald Trump. And you know what? It almost worked, except there was no collusion. Mueller knew it when he was appointed. Rod Rosenstein knew there was collusion when he appointed him.
The lesson is never plead, fight.
Always fight,
Always
never
fight.
give in.
And don't talk voluntarily, my God.
Take the fifth. That's why God made it.
The Jimmy Hoffa rule. And by the way, I'm for that. Joe diGenova, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ken Starr was the independent counsel, of course, during the Clinton administration, and recently wrote the book Contempt, a memoir of the Clinton investigation. He joins us tonight. Mr. Starr, thank you very much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure, Tucker. Thank you.
To Joe diGenova's point, which I think sounds right, that nothing we have seen unearthed by the Mueller investigation so far, at least pertaining to American citizens, relates to Russian collusion. Does it bother you that the investigation seems to have gone off on a tangent?
I don't think it's a tangent, and I've got a different perspective. Not on the collusion point. I completely agree with Joe. There's nothing about this that smacks of or even suggests collusion with the Russians. But just taking the documents that were filed at face value, and Joe may call them into question, but just taking them for what they say that General Flynn lied multiple times to different agencies, different folks in the Justice Department, including about Turkey, his representation of Turkey, his representation in terms of why did he write an op-ed piece. And you can say, who cares about this? Well, I will say this. Don't lie to the investigators. From what I've seen, there was no perjury trap. He was able to tell the truth, but for some reason about issues that he had every reason to be involved with the Russian ambassador, issues with respect to sanctions, the going forward, what's the relationship going to be with Russia? This is a completely appropriate contact that he had, and so why he fell into this pattern, and it's a pattern apparently. Just again, I'm taking what the document says that Mr. Mueller filed.
May I stop you there and ask? My understanding is that the conversation in question with FBI agents that forms the basis of these charges was a voluntary one, at which he did not have a lawyer present. Is that correct? It took place in the White House, and he didn't. I mean, if he understood it was an interview, he would have had an attorney, correct? But he didn't. So what does that tell you?
It tells you that for whatever reason, if he made a mistake, if it's an honest mistake, but that's not what he's pled to. He's pled to lying. So whether it's poor judgment on his part, and it is, it's an American tragedy. His 33 years of service, 5 years of combat, Defense Intelligence Agency. So this is someone who's had this exemplary career, and I quite agree. This is hugely tragic, but I don't think it works to simply say, hey, he didn't tell the truth, who cares? And no one said that, but I think that's the thrust of some of the critique that we're hearing, that
well, I think
it's okay.
The broader question, and I think this arose during the investigation that you presided over, is at what cost to the country? I mean, okay. But
absolutely.
I mean, so you empower this guy who basically in real life has no oversight, let's not pretend, he doesn't have any oversight, and you empower him in order to uncover the Russian plot, and then he winds up threatening people with prison for things that have nothing to do with the Russian plot. So, like, how do we benefit from that exactly?
And that's a very fair question. The whole special counsel apparatus, the independent counsel apparatus, those are fair questions. Let's talk about those kinds of questions. Now, the check that was on me as independent counsel was, I didn't simply say, let's go investigate Monica Lewinsky. The Attorney General of the United States made that determination. And I think that's lost on the American people.
I think that's
and
probably
so too here. Yeah, and so too here, there are checks. You might say, well, how much of a check has it been? But right now, the person who is in charge of this investigation, not day to day, is Matt Whitaker, the acting Attorney General, under the regulations.
Yeah.
So let's see. Let's see what unfolds in the coming days.
I don't think he'll be. Very quickly, Mr. Starr, you knew President George H.W. Bush for an awful long time, 50 years.
Oh, yes.
What was your feeling about the service today?
Oh, it was an absolutely gorgeous outpouring. I loved, among other things, Senator Alan Simpson talking about the road in Washington, D.C. of humility is not very crowded, but that's the road that George Herbert Walker Bush walked on. I was overruled by him, by the way, as President of the United States when I was serving Solicitor General. And you know what? He was very wise in overruling me. He was right. I wasn't. He was a great man.
Wow. A footnote to history. Ken Starr, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Tucker. My pleasure.
The state of California was once the richest state. Today, it's the poorest state by far. Why is that? There is a reason, and we've got it for you after the break. Plus, we'll have the best sights and sounds from today's funeral for the 41st President of the United States. Well, for more than a century, California represented everything that was great about America. In 1849, thousands rode wagons across the entire continent to participate in the gold rush. In the early 1900s, film directors came by the dozens from the East Coast and made Los Angeles the center of global film production. During the Dust Bowl, thousands of Midwestern farmers found refuge in the Central Valley. And of course, for decades, California has been home to the world's greatest technological innovation. It's no accident that California became the country's richest state. It was the land of limitless opportunity. Even if you never made millions there, you could live in what was, in effect, a middle-class paradise. That's not true anymore. According to the census, almost a fifth of Californians now live in poverty. That's the highest percentage in the country. California's middle class is fleeing to Phoenix and Reno and Boise. Soon the state will be comprised almost entirely of rich and poor. How did this happen? That question is rarely asked. The answer is pretty simple. Low-skilled immigration overwhelmed California. More than a quarter of the state's entire population, as of today, is foreign-born. Again, the highest rate in the country. Some of these immigrants are building successful new companies in Silicon Valley. Good for them. But most of them are not. In fact, the overwhelming majority of these immigrants are on welfare. Fully 72% of non-citizen households in the state of California now receive aid. That compares to just 35% of native-born households, more than double the rate. Now, 100 years ago, immigrants came to California for opportunity, and now they come for the benefits. Who can blame them? Democrats long ago discovered that welfare is a handy vote-buying scheme. Free stuff equals political power. So they give more, even as native-born Californians are forced to flee an increasingly unaffordable state. Democratic lawmakers even now are considering a new bill that would give state-funded health insurance to adult illegal immigrants. That means that literally anybody from anywhere on the globe could hop the border in Tijuana and get health care paid for by California taxpayers. Pretty generous. If only California cared about its own people this much, it would still be the Golden State. Well, President George H.W. Bush was honored today in a state funeral at the Washington National Cathedral. It was a moving tribute to the country's 41st president. Here's some of the highlights from it.
He was born with just two settings: full throttle, then sleep. Taught us what it means to be a wonderful father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He was firm in his principles and supportive as we began to seek our own ways. He encouraged and comforted, but never steered. We tested his patience. I know I did. But he always responded with the great gift of unconditional love. Last Friday, when I was told he had minutes to live, I called him. The guy answered the phone, said I think he can hear you, but he hadn't said anything for most of the day. I said, Dad, I love you and you've been a wonderful father. And the last words he would ever say on earth were, I love you too. We're going to miss you. Your decency, sincerity, and kind soul will stay with us forever. So through our tears, let us know the blessings of knowing and loving you, a great and noble man, the best father a son or daughter could have. And in our grief, let us smile knowing that Dad is hugging Robin and holding Mom's hand again.
Wow. Tomorrow, a funeral service for President Bush will be held in Houston, Texas. Bush 41 will then be laid to rest at his presidential library on the campus of the University, Texas A&M University. Stay with Fox News throughout the day tomorrow for coverage of that. So riots are taking place in Paris and throughout France. They're about climate change, and they tell you a lot about the attitudes of the people in charge. We'll investigate that after the break. Well, for decades now, elites have told the rest of us that they are deeply, deeply concerned about climate change, much more concerned than we are because they're deeper and more thoughtful and compassionate people. Bernie Sanders, for example, deeply concerned.
Donald Trump spoke last night, but somehow he forgot to mention the words climate change. What an outrage.
Climate change is causing devastating problems in our country and the world.
Climate change is the great global environmental crisis that we face.
In fact, climate change is directly related to the growth of terrorism. Yes, Mr. Trump, climate change is real.
It's real, and he feels it deeply. Over at NBC, by the way, one of their anchors recently wondered if climate change is so serious that it might render our lives without meaning.
Fires, floods, storms, famine, the effects of climate change are all around us. And according to a new essay penned by Bill McKibben, it is shrinking our world. Not livably, not literally, excuse me, but livably. I read that New Yorker article today and I thought, gosh, how pointless is my life and how pointless are the decisions that I'm making on a day-to-day basis when we are not focused on climate change every day, when it's not leading every one of our newscasts.
Yeah. In other words, if it's not about climate change, it doesn't really matter. So let's take this seriously just for a second. Why not? They're always telling us, let's take what they say at face value. They care deeply about climate change. But if they care as deeply as they say they do, if they believe the destruction of the planet is as imminent as they say it is, why are they living the way that they do? You just saw the tape of Bernie Sanders. He cares a lot. And the news story came out today that said he spent $300,000 in a single month flying on a private plane. Huh. How could he do that? How could any of them own second homes if they really believe climate change is real? How are they using a car service when they could use mass transit? Why aren't they all vegans? Why aren't they living what they say they believe? They're not. The solutions they suggest, and this is not unrelated, are almost always going to be paid for by other people. The most regressive kinds of taxes, energy taxes, imposed on the masses. Well, as the riots in Paris show, the masses aren't into this. And why would they be? Nomiki Konst is a candidate for New York City public advocate, and she joins us tonight. Nomiki, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hi, Tucker. How you doing?
I'm great. But I'm a little bit confused. So mostly debates about climate change are one person saying it's real, and the other one's like, we don't really have all the evidence. Granted, I grant everything you say about climate change. I'm just for the sake of this conversation.
Thank you. That's a start.
Yeah, okay.
You admit it.
But if you really believe what you're saying, and if Bernie Sanders really believes what he's saying, why is he flying on private planes? I mean, it's a sincere question.
So let's not get distracted from the real issue here.
No. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to let you off that easily. Why is it not a real issue? If climate change, as Katie Church has told us, is really the only issue that matters, then why aren't we living like it's the only issue that matters?
Because it really comes down to the industry. If the industry wants to make planes that exist off of renewable energy rather than oil and gas, then we will all be able to live on this planet. It starts at the industry level, not the consumer. You know, it's really not fair to put the tax on the individual.
It's not fair for someone who's telling us the planet's being destroyed to live in a way that suggests that he actually believes the planet's being destroyed. So I honestly really don't get it. So if you're Al Gore and you say, nothing is more important than climate change, I'm a better person than you are because I care more than you. By the way, I have one of the largest houses in Nashville, and I fly private, and I take a Suburban to the private airport, to the FBO. Why should I be okay? I mean, sincerely, why is that okay?
That is not going to individual choices are not going to solve the disaster that we are facing. We already have a migration issue. We already have flooding. We already have hurricanes that have hit Puerto Rico, have hit New Orleans, have hit Florida, and have displaced so many working people. This is an industry change. We have to cap emissions globally.
But hold on.
And if we don't cap emissions with big industries and policy, then those individual choices mean nothing.
Okay, well, first of all, hold on. First of all, individual choices always mean something.
In a libertarian's fantasy world, sure.
I'm not a libertarian, and I'm not living in a fantasy world. In real life, individual choices matter, or else what's the point of any of this, okay? So it does start with, liberals used to say it starts with one person. I guess they don't anymore because they don't want to be held to their own standards. But the solutions are always like, ordinary working people ought to pay higher gas taxes.
It's not the solution at all. And actually, we are against that. Progressives versus the neoliberals and neocons, progressives understand that this needs to be a huge policy change. With the place where we are right now, if we increase the temperature 1 degree, you and I won't be living in D.C. and New York anymore.
Okay, but
we
hold
will
on,
be
hold on.
displaced.
No, I want to talk about the
industries will
public
lose
policy.
money.
Okay,
yes,
I want to talk about the public policy solutions that will flow from the predictions that you're making. Is there any solution you've ever heard of that doesn't increase the price of energy? I've never heard of one.
Well, okay, so if you're going to be focused on the price of energy, we're not going to have a planet in 10 years.
Hold on.
We have to talk about changing.
Wait, hold on. I thought you cared. I thought you cared about working people.
We're going down a rabbit hole. I want to talk about the
not.
solutions. The solution would be a Green New Deal, moving to 100% renewable energy, forcing the companies that are jacking up the prices on working people to actually reduce their emissions so that working people aren't displaced, so working people don't have to pay the cost of hurricane damage and have clean water, and the water is not being privatized.
Look, volume is not the same as an argument, okay? So just really simple question.
You don't
would
like
your
opinionated women, do you?
I live with four of them.
Volume.
You're not going to go, you're a sexist.
You're pretty loud.
Now. Okay.
My earpiece is blaring right now.
Let me just ask you a really simple question. Would the solutions that you're espousing now, would they raise the price of gasoline for wage earners, the ones you claim to care about?
I'm actually
Gas
against,
would be the same price.
I am against raising consumer prices. That is a neoliberal design. I am a democratic socialist. I think we should pass policies and actually make rich people, millionaires and billionaires and corporations, pay taxes. That's the problem. No one at the top is paying taxes, and the burden is going to the consumer.
But you would allow private planes to fly, I guess, right?
I think
that
private planes have an obligation to change their standards. That is what policy is all about.
Well,
if
so
we
we get
didn't
solar
regulate water,
planes.
Solar private plane. I mean, I don't know how that would function, but I think that there are other efficient forms of energy.
Name one.
Energy use.
Really quick, just for fun. Name a renewable energy source that could power an airplane.
Well, there's. I mean, we see it with cars.
Hemp? No, I'm seriously.
You could charge. I mean, there are. Do you know what a Prius is and a Tesla is? You could do that at the level of private planes.
An electric airplane, a big electric airplane.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm no engineer, but I have heard of electric cars and airplanes and other forms of electric solutions. I mean, there's also solar generated so that the electricity that you're charging with is solar energy.
We're back to the solar plane. Good.
Or wind generated.
I'd be psyched for that. Text me a picture if you find one on the internet. Now, Mickey, thank you very much. Great to see you.
We have to solve this problem. You can't live in another planet.
Good to see you. Columbia students can't take a joke, it turns out. They're the most impressive people our society produces, but they have no sense of humor. They just kicked a comedian off their campus for telling a very tepid joke. Barstool Sports' Dave Portnoy tells real jokes and has lived to tell the tale. How does he do it? He joins us next with his answer. Well, Nimish Patel works for Saturday Night Live. He is the, in case you're keeping track, the first Indian-American cast member on that show. You'd think that would make him a hero to the pro-diversity crowd. But instead, Patel is a villain tonight. Why? Well, he recently made the mistake of going to Columbia University, where all the impressive kids go, and did a comedy set briefly before he was booted off stage. He told a joke that began roughly this way. Being gay can't be a choice, he said, because, quote, no one looks in the mirror and thinks, this black thing is too easy, let me just add another thing to it, end quote. Now, is that a funny joke? I don't know. Your call. But it's not really attacking anybody. It hardly seems vicious. But you can't say that in 2018. So the question is, what exactly can you say? Well, Dave Portnoy seems to say exactly whatever he wants to say all the time. He's the founder of Barstool Sports. For some reason, it's working for him, if nobody else. He joins us tonight to tell us how he does that. Dave, thanks a lot for joining us. So, am I missing something? I didn't think it was a particularly hilarious joke, or maybe there was more to it. He got yelled off stage before he could finish. But that didn't seem to me to cross any kind of obvious line, or am I missing the lines, I guess?
No, I thought that was a pretty good joke. The name of the event, by the way, I think was Culture Shock Reclaim. I mean, if you go to a comedy club and you have shock in there and that offends you, you probably shouldn't be in the comedy club. Very, very odd set of circumstances to actually being paid or whatever to go to this event and be offended by any sort of joke. And like you said, that was a nothing joke. I mean, I think it's well written, but he had to be the most surprised guy in the room.
I mean, what's amazing to me is this is Columbia. Like, these are supposed to be the smartest, most sophisticated young people in America, certainly the ones with the highest SAT scores. What does it tell you that they have literally no sense of humor?
Well, I mean, that actually doesn't surprise me about the Ivy Leagues. I don't know where you went, Tucker. You seem like you could be an Ivy League guy with the bow tie and all that. But it's but Ivy League guys, I mean, are stuffy, no sense of humor. That's kind of the stereotype. But then you have the other side of it. I mean, there's certainly, like, the Harvard Lampoon is certainly famous for pushing boundaries and things like that. I don't know what this club was. It was Asian Allegiance of something. Again, you can't name the event Culture Shock. And then when somebody says a pretty vanilla joke in the scheme of jokes, get upset. Very odd. He just had to be shocked. Like, whoa, what did I say? He probably didn't even know.
So I've asked you this before, but I can't get enough of it because I think it's so interesting. You run a site, it's one of the most popular, and I would say also one of the best on the internet, where you seem to say pretty much exactly what you feel like saying, and all your writers, Francis Ellis, one of my favorites, on your site, have the same attitude. And you continue to do it without being forced to stop. How do you do that? How do you carve out that freedom in a world where there isn't any freedom?
Yeah, we built that. Again, we're not a slave to our advertisers. That's a huge thing. So we don't get caught in the winds of public opinion and things like that. And it works for us. And to be honest, we've come to now accept in this environment where people get mad about jokes like that, we're just going to stay true to what we do. And there is a big market for it. And there's always going to be haters. And a lot of times the haters don't even know what we do. Tucker, I've been called, like, anti-Semitic a million times. I'm Jewish. So, you know, people just don't know what they're talking about. But I get that like once a week.
When someone says, Dave Portnoy, you anti-Semite, how do you respond to that?
It depends what type of mood. Sometimes I'll be like, yeah, you're right, you nailed it. I'm like a Nazi or something. But and again, I'm playing, and people are so crazy they may take that out of context. So, you know, we are a comedy site. We're comfortable in what we do. But if people don't like something, they feel like they're right. They don't want to hear the other side of the coin. But they'll go out of the way. There were pictures of me, Tucker, on this show, and somebody tried to say somehow that made me, like, anti-Semite. And it's like, dude, I'm Jewish. So what are you talking about? People just don't really want to look into the context or what's going on. And we've embraced it. And there is a big market for it. And I think that makes us more popular in this day and age when people are afraid to say, you know, that joke that guy got booted off stage for, that's ridiculous. Steve Carell, The Office, my personal favorite comedy, he was on record, I think, a couple weeks ago. He says, The Office couldn't exist now. Two people would get mad. Exactly. I mean, that's a shame. That's a true shame.
But you tell the truth and you're winning anyway. That's why you're an inspiration to the rest of us. Dave Portnoy, El Presidente, great to see you.
Appreciate it.
One Democratic lawmaker says she has cracked the code that explains why Democrats aren't winning more seats in the Congress. We'll tell you what she's discovered next.